Houses selling for $23,000 in a developed nation. Streets where tap water runs brown. Towns where the nearest hospital is 300 kilometers away and the ambulance might not have fuel. This is not a documentary about a distant developing country. This is Australia, 2025, and these places exist right now. You probably think of Australia as beaches, Sydney Harbour, and endless prosperity, the mining boom, the lucky country. But drive 3 hours west of any major city and you will find communities that international aid workers have compared to refugee camps. Towns where 40% unemployment is normal, where children grow up without seeing a dentist, where entire neighbourhoods have been abandoned and reclaimed by the desert. Today, we are going inside 10 Australian towns where living conditions would shock most people in Melbourne or Brisbane. These are places the tourism campaigns will never show you. Communities that have been left behind by every economic boom, every government promise, every national conversation about prosperity. And the question we need to ask is simple. How does this happen in one of the wealthiest countries on earth? Wilcannia sits on the Darling River in far west New South Wales. The main street looks like a war zone. Boarded up shop fronts with smashed windows. Packs of stray dogs wandering past the old general store that closed in 2018. The population has dropped from 2,000 people in the 1980s to about 550 today. Most of them are Indigenous Australians living below the poverty line. The median house price here is $18,000. Not a typo, $18,000. You can buy a 3-bedroom weatherboard house for the price of a used Toyota. But nobody is buying because there are no jobs. The unemployment rate in Wilcannia sits above 45%. There is one small supermarket that charges Sydney prices for food that arrives on a truck once a week. The nearest hospital with an emergency department is nearly 200 kilometres away in Broken Hill. During the drought years, the Darling River stopped flowing completely. Residents had to rely on bottled water because the town supply became too contaminated to drink. Children developed skin infections from bathing in tank water that had been sitting stagnant for months. The government promised help, delivered some emergency supplies. Then the news cameras left and nothing changed. The school building sits at the edge of town with broken windows and graffiti covering the brick walls. Inside, teachers work with outdated textbooks and no computers. The playground equipment rusted years ago and was never replaced. Students share desks because there are not enough to go around. When it rains, the roof leaks into buckets placed throughout the classrooms. Wyndham is a coastal town in the far north of Western Australia. It sits on the Cambridge Gulf, surrounded by some of the most stunning landscapes in the country. Red dirt cliffs, turquoise water, endless sky. But walk into the town itself and the beauty disappears fast. The old meatworks that employed hundreds of people closed in 1985. Since then, Wyndham has been dying slowly. The population is around 750, 70% Indigenous. Youth unemployment runs above 60%. There is nothing for young people to do except sit under the few trees that provide shade in the 40-degree heat. Houses here sell for $20,000 to $30,000. Some properties have been on the market for years with no buyers. The buildings are falling apart, roofs caving in, asbestos exposed. The town water supply is safe to drink, but the sewage system is so old that during the wet season, it regularly overflows into the streets. There is one small clinic staffed by a rotating roster of nurses. If you need a doctor, you drive 95 kilometers to Kununurra. If you need surgery or specialist care, you fly to Darwin or Perth, both over 1,000 kilometers away. The local school struggles to keep teachers. Most arrive, last 1 year, then leave for coastal postings with better pay and conditions. Brewarrina in northwest New South Wales has a population of around 1,000 people. 80% are Aboriginal Australians. The town sits on the Barwon River and has deep cultural significance. Ancient fish traps built by indigenous communities thousands of years ago still exist near the town. But the modern reality is grim. The unemployment rate here is 52%. More than half the working age population has no job. The median household income is less than $25,000 a year. That puts most families well below the poverty line. Housing is cheap because no one wants to live here. You can buy a house for $23,000. Some homes have been listed for as low as $15,000. The irony is brutal. This town sits on one of the oldest human engineering sites in the world. The fish traps built here date back over 40,000 years, making them older than the Egyptian pyramids. Indigenous engineering that shows sophisticated understanding of hydrology and seasonal fish migration. UNESCO has considered listing them as a World Heritage Site, but the descendants of the people who built those traps now live in some of the worst poverty in Australia. The town has chronic problems with crime and substance abuse. The police station operates with a skeleton crew. The main street has more closed businesses than open ones. The local high school has around 60 students and struggles with attendance rates below 50%. Many teenagers drop out by year 9. There is one aged care facility that doubles as the town medical centre. No resident doctors. Nurses run the clinic and call a remote GP when needed. Serious medical cases get airlifted to Dubbo, 290 kilometres south. If the Royal Flying Doctor Service cannot fly due to weather, people just wait. Tibooburra is the hottest town in New South Wales. Summer temperatures regularly hit 48 degrees. The population is around 120 permanent residents. It sits in the far northwest corner of the state, more than 300 kilometres from the nearest significant town. The entire economy runs on grey nomads passing through on the way to Cameron Corner. There is one pub, one small general store, and a historic courthouse that now operates as a museum. Phones do not work reliably. Internet is satellite only and cuts out during storms. The nearest fuel station is 90 kilometres away. Houses sell for around $25,000 when they sell at all. Most properties sit empty. The town has no school, no medical facilities, no police presence. If something goes wrong, you handle it yourself or wait hours for help from Broken Hill. During summer, the town essentially shuts down. Anyone who can afford to leave does. The handful of people who stay behind live in homes with no air conditioning, relying on swamp coolers that barely function when the temperature hits the mid-40s. Water is trucked in. Power comes from diesel generators that break down constantly. The town survives on tourism that lasts 3 months a year. The rest of the time, it is a ghost town, baking under a relentless outback sun. Coober Pedy is famous for opal mining and underground homes. Tourists love it, but the reality for people who actually live there is far different. The population has dropped from around 3,500 in the mining boom years to less than 1,700 today. The town sits in the middle of the South Australian desert. No trees, no grass, just red dirt and mine shafts. Summer heat makes the surface unlivable during the day. That is why people built dugouts, underground homes carved into the hillsides. But those dugouts are now falling apart. Unstable mine shafts collapse regularly. No council inspections. No building codes enforced. Unemployment runs around 30% officially, but the real number is higher because many miners work cash jobs that do not get reported. Housing is cheap. Underground dugouts sell for $20,000 to $40,000. Surface homes go for even less because nobody wants them. The infrastructure is crumbling. The town water supply is desalinated, bore water that tastes terrible. The hospital closed years ago. There is a small health clinic with no resident doctor. Patients get flown to Adelaide for anything serious. The school has fewer than 100 students. Teachers cycle through on short contracts. Coober Pedy has no sewage system. Every home and business uses septic tanks. When those tanks fail, waste seeps into the ground. During rare desert rains, the streets flood with a mix of mud and untreated sewage. Tour buses arrive daily, bringing visitors who pay to see the quirky underground homes and visit the Opal shops on the main strip. The tourists stay for 2 hours, buy some postcards, then leave. They never see the real Coober Pedy, where families live in dugouts with collapsing walls and no running water. They do not meet the miners who work 12-hour days in 120-degree heat, hoping to find one good stone that might pay this month's bills. The tourism industry brings in money, but almost none of it reaches the people who actually live here permanently. Norseman sits at the crossroads of the Air Highway and Coolgardie Esperance Highway in Western Australia. It is the last town before the Nullarbor Plain if you are driving east. The gold mine that kept the town alive closed in 2007. Since then, the population has dropped to around 1,000 people. The main street has a row of closed shops. The old hospital building sits abandoned. The nearest functioning hospital is in Esperance, 200 kilometres south. The town relies on a small clinic with visiting doctors who fly in twice a week. Houses sell for as low as $22,000. 3-bedroom brick homes with yards sit empty because no one is moving to Norseman. There are no jobs. The few businesses that remain cater to travellers passing through. One roadhouse, one motel, one supermarket with limited stock and prices 30% higher than Perth. The town water comes from deep bores and tastes heavily of salt. During summer, the temperature hits 40 degrees regularly. Most homes have no air conditioning. Power bills are astronomical because everything runs on diesel generators, supplemented by an aging grid. Families who stay do so because they have nowhere else to go. Leaving costs money they do not have, so they remain in a town with no future, watching the buildings slowly decay around them. Menzies in the goldfields region of Western Australia was once a booming mining town with over 10,000 people. Today, the population is around 80. The main street is lined with ruins, stone buildings with collapsed roofs. The old railway station stands empty, tracks long since removed. The town has no services, no school, no medical clinic, no police. The nearest town with basic facilities is Kalgoorlie, 132 kilometres south. Residents drive there for groceries, fuel, and medical appointments. Houses in Menzies sell for $15,000 to $25,000 when they sell. Most properties are abandoned. Squatters move into empty homes and strip them for scrap metal. The Shire government has no money for maintenance. Roads are full of potholes. Streetlights do not work. Water comes from rainwater tanks. If the tanks run dry, residents haul water from Kalgoorlie in containers. Power is unreliable. The grid was built for a town of thousands, not 80 people, so outages are frequent. The few people who remain are either retirees on fixed incomes who cannot afford to move or prospectors still chasing gold. They live in isolation, surrounded by the ruins of a town that died decades ago but refuses to disappear completely. Andamuka in South Australia is another opal mining town in terminal decline. The population peaked at around 2,000 in the 1970s. Today, it hovers around 400. The town is 80 kilometres from the nearest sealed road. Getting there means driving on rough dirt tracks that wash out during rain. There is no reticulated water. Every resident relies on rainwater tanks or water trucked in at high cost. There is no sewage system, septic systems, or long drops only. The power supply is unstable. Most homes run on solar panels with diesel backup generators. The town has a small general store and a pub. That is it. No school, no medical clinic, no police station. Children get homeschooled or board in distant towns. Medical emergencies mean a 2-hour drive to Roxby Downs or a Royal Flying Doctor Service evacuation. Houses sell for $20,000 to $30,000, many a little more than shacks made from corrugated iron and scrap materials. Building standards do not exist. Asbestos is everywhere. People build what they can afford with whatever materials they find. The opal mines that made Andamuka famous are mostly tapped out. A few diehards still dig, but the big strikes are gone. What remains is a community hanging on in one of the harshest environments in Australia with no support and no future. Quilpie in southwest Queensland has a population of around 600. The town survives on cattle stations and opal mining, but both industries are in decline. The drought that gripped Queensland for years devastated the region. Cattle stations went under. Workers left. The main street has a few open businesses: a general store, a pub, a servo. But the town feels empty. Houses sell for $25,000 to $35,000. 3-bedroom homes with yards that would cost $700,000 in Brisbane go for the price of a second-hand car. There is a small hospital with 12 beds and no resident doctor. Nurses staff the facility. A GP flies in once a week. Anything serious requires a medical evacuation to Charleville, 200 kilometres east, or Brisbane, 700 kilometres away. The town water supply comes from artesian bores. It is safe to drink, but heavily mineralised. The taste is terrible. Most people buy bottled water for drinking and use bore water for everything else. The sewage system is old and struggles during heavy rain. Quilpie has one school that covers primary and secondary. Enrolment is dropping every year. Teachers struggle with isolation. Most leave after a year or two. The town has no future without significant investment, and that investment is never coming. Lightning Ridge in northern New South Wales is the black opal capital of the world. But the glamorous image of opal mining hides a much darker reality. The town has a population of around 2,000. Most live in rough conditions. Miners dig by hand in 100-degree heat. Some live in caravans or tin sheds with no running water. Housing is cheap. You can buy a house for $20,000 to $30,000, but many properties are unlivable. No plumbing, no power, asbestos walls, collapsed roofs. People squat in abandoned miner shacks and call them home. The town has basic services, but they are stretched thin. One hospital with limited capacity. One high school with chronic underfunding. The unemployment rate sits around 30% officially, but many miners work off the books, so the real number is unknown. Lightning Ridge has no reticulated sewage system at all. Every property uses septic or composting toilets. The town water comes from bores and is safe, but tastes terrible. Most people rely on rainwater tanks. During droughts, water is trucked in at prices that make showering a luxury. Crime is a problem. Opal theft happens constantly. Drug use is widespread. Violence erupts regularly in the pubs on hot weekend nights. The police station operates with a skeleton crew, trying to manage 2,000 people spread across mining camps. Miners work alone in dangerous conditions, with no safety oversight whatsoever. Cave-ins happen regularly. People die underground, and sometimes their bodies are not found for days. White Cliffs is a tiny opal mining settlement in western New South Wales with a population of around 150 people. The town is known for underground homes built to escape the brutal heat. But it is also one of the most isolated communities in Australia. The nearest town with basic services is Wilcannia, 93 kilometres away. There is no mobile phone coverage. No internet except for expensive satellite connections that drop out constantly. The town has one small general store that opens a few days a week. No medical clinic, no school. Houses sell for $15,000 to $25,000. Most are dugouts carved into hillsides. Some are just holes in the ground with tin roofs. Building standards do not exist. Safety inspections never happen. People dig and build what they can afford. Water comes from rainwater tanks or is trucked in from Wilcannia. There is no sewage system. Everyone uses composting toilets or septic systems. When the generators break down, people go without power for weeks waiting for parts. The opal mining that sustains the town is barely viable anymore. Prices have dropped. Tourist numbers are declining. Miners spend months digging and find nothing. The few people who remain do so because they have nowhere else to go or because they are chasing a dream that died decades ago. These 10 towns represent a reality that Australia does not want to acknowledge. While politicians talk about economic growth and prosperity, thousands of Australians live in conditions that would be unacceptable in any developed nation. Houses sell for the price of a used car because nobody wants to live there. Infrastructure crumbles. Services disappear. People are left behind. The uncomfortable truth is that Australia has created a two-tier system. Capital cities boom with million-dollar apartments and endless development. But travel a few hundred kilometres inland and you find communities that have been written off. The mining companies came, extracted wealth, and left. The government promised investment and never delivered. The people who remain struggle to survive in towns with no jobs, no services, and no hope. This is not ancient history. These conditions exist right now in 2025. While Sydney property prices hit record highs and Melbourne builds new skyscrapers, children in Wilcannia are getting sick from contaminated water. While Perth celebrates another mining boom, Menzies sits empty with 80 people clinging to existence. While Brisbane expands and prospers, Quilpie dies slowly in the outback heat. The Australian government spends billions on infrastructure in major cities. New metro lines, new highways, new sports stadiums. But the roads in Menzies are full of potholes that have not been repaired in a decade. The water system in Andamuka has not been upgraded since it was installed. The hospital in Wilcannia operates with equipment that would be rejected by any facility in Sydney or Melbourne. Some people will say these towns are not viable, that they should be abandoned, that people should move to the cities where the jobs are. But these are not just dots on a map. These are communities with deep cultural significance. Brewarrina has 40,000 years of continuous indigenous habitation. Wilcannia was a major port town in the 1800s when paddle steamers travelled the Darling River. These places have history and meaning. More importantly, these are Australian citizens. People who deserve the same basic services and opportunities as anyone in Melbourne or Sydney. Access to clean water, access to medical care, access to education. The idea that geography should determine whether you have these things is a fundamental failure of government responsibility. What does this say about us as a nation? How do we justify calling ourselves wealthy when elderly people in Menzies haul water in containers because there is no running supply? When children in Brewarrina grow up without basic medical care? When entire towns like Tibooburra have no schools, forcing families to choose between education and staying together? When young people in Wyndham face 60% unemployment with no pathway out? The houses may sell for $23,000, but the real cost is measured in lives that never reach their potential, in communities that wither and die while the rest of the country looks away, in children who grow up believing they are worth less because that is what every policy decision and funding allocation tells them, in futures that are stolen before they even begin.